Hi everyone, my name is Alec Sunners. I'm joined by my colleague here, Graham Ewing, and today we are talking about the top 10 things to do before you retire in 2025.
And Alec, yeah, this is a topic that I feel like most clients really come to us for is retirement. So I'm looking forward to diving into this with you.
Yeah, and I think just jumping right into it, the first thing you need to do if you're thinking about retiring in 2025 is figure out your annual spending number. And there are a couple of different ways that you can do that, but it's very important to know that before you go into retirement so you're not sort of going in blind about what you're spending. It's a very big switch from always getting a paycheck and just spending what you're earning to now you have to start taking from savings and other sources of income. So the best way to do that is to track your cash flow.
Right.
And there are different tools you can use. Some people like Excel sheets and they track all the transactions they have. Some people use software like Monarch Money.
Right.
It's sort of a replacement if you've heard of Mint before. You link all your credit cards and bank statements and it automatically flows through with the transactions. The quote-unquote easy way to do this is to take a look at your current paycheck and find that net pay and then multiply that by 26 if you're paid biweekly. So that gets you that net amount. So if you make $4,000 per paycheck net, that would be $104,000 per year.
Right. And then within that part, the reason that it's not as great as the Monarch Money or the tracking your cash flow is there's other things in your paycheck that sometimes are not fully reflected, where it comes like health insurance or something like Roth contributions are going to show up differently in your net pay than a pre-tax contribution to a 401k.
Yeah.
So yes, but better than nothing. I would say even in the last month, I've met with probably 4 clients that we've really dug deep into their spending and have found out actually they were off by a little bit. And this, of all the things we go over today, this is arguably the most important because if you're off by, $20,000, $30,000, that's going to impact the plan.
Yeah, and you made a good point. You mentioned 401ks.
Right.
If you're retiring in the middle of the year, it's still a good idea to get as much as you can into that 401k before you retire. So the max this year is $31,000 in 2025. And a little bonus tip for you, if you're between ages of 60 and 63, you get sort of a super catch-up, and you can contribute $34,750.
Right. It's not just the catch-up, it's the super catch-up, and we haven't come up with the best name for it, but that's about that gets us pretty close.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of important things, Social Security is arguably one of the biggest questions we get inside of that topic of retirement. So the first step is downloading your Social Security statement, see what is your full retirement age benefit. Most people these days are retiring with the full retirement age benefit of 67, but you can collect as early as 62, you can wait as late as 70. The answer of when should you collect really comes down to life expectancy. If you could tell me when's your last day on earth, we can tell you exactly when you should collect. But the problem is we don't know that, and a lot of people are a little scared that they're going to lose out. So they say, I'm going to collect at 62. Well, the problem with that, particularly with married couples, is that the surviving spouse will get the higher benefit. So if you have somebody who is getting a $4,000 benefit and somebody that's getting a $2,000 benefit, even if the person who's getting the $4,000 benefit passes away in year 2, you'd think, oh, well, we lost out. Well, no, that $4,000 benefit goes to the surviving spouse, and that surviving spouse's smaller $2,000 benefit really goes away. It's a little more nuanced than that, but in the gist and conceptually, that's really what you're thinking about. So looking at joint life expectancy is arguably more important, but at the end of the day, it does come down to life expectancy.
So another source of potential retirement income is pension income. So if you're someone with a pension and you're going to retire in 2025, you have to look at all your options. A pension isn't just, here's the number you get, go on your merry way. You have to look at the different ages you can collect. If you want a survivor benefit, if you're single, the answer is easy. You take all the benefit for yourself. Right. Well, now if you're married, you have to decide, okay, do I want 50% survivor, 75, 100, 0, and all those are going to change the monthly benefit you receive based on how much you would leave to your spouse if you pass away. So those are all things you have to think about with your pension income. And the other big thing is a lot of the times you'll get an offer for a lump sum instead of taking your pension. And that offer, you have to do sort of a calculation to see is it worthwhile to take my monthly pension amount, or should I take this lump sum and then invest it in the stock market?
Right.
It's the calculation you have to do, and there are some assumptions you have to take. What are market returns going to be like? How long am I going to live? Do I need that guaranteed income, or can I be okay with fluctuations in the market? These are all things you have to analyze and take a look at when you look at all your pension options.
Yeah, and I just sharing a personal story. My grandparents, they both retired. My grandfather took a pension, and my grandmother was less healthy than he was.
Yeah.
So they took that single life annuity where it would be around as long as he lived. Well, unfortunately, after 4 or 5 years of retirement, he passed away and she got nothing.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that deliberately, which they kind of were, that's one thing, but you also have to look at it from a bigger picture. What's happening with Social Security, like I talked about earlier? How does that coincide with this pension decision?
Mm-hmm.
It all has to come together to make sure you're good under all those scenarios.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of another source of income, we've got Social Security, we've got pension, and of course the last piece of that is your portfolio. So how do you figure out what's my income plan for my portfolio? And really, it's everything we already talked about. So you take your annual spending number, let's say it was $150,000. Let's say you have Social Security of $40,000 and a pension of $30,000. So now we have $70,000 already just from pension and Social Security, which to get us up to that $150,000 means we need another $80,000. So at the end of the day, you're looking at your portfolio and saying, if I'm trying to do that $150,000, I have to pull $80,000. It is, of course, a little more complicated that in reality, but conceptually on the whole, that's really how you get there.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about retiring, you need to come up now with that investment plan. So we've talked about Social Security, we've talked about pension. That's sort of your guaranteed income that you know is coming in each month. Well, now when you look at your portfolio, you have to come up with a plan for the long run of how you want that portfolio invested. So let's take an example for a $2 million portfolio. And let's say we'll go back to that $80,000 you need from that portfolio. Let's say that's about a 4% rate of return. You can invest moderately in that portfolio. Well, let's say you say, well, I don't need 80,000, I only need 60,000 for my portfolio. Well, that's 3%. You can invest a little bit more conservatively. You don't have to be subject to the swings in the market as much. Now, on the other hand, if you say, well, I need 100,000 after Social Security and pension, well, now you're looking at 5%. You have to be a little bit more aggressive in your portfolio if you want that higher rate of return with that more additional income coming from the portfolio.
Right.
And there are two different ways to look at it. If you need that 100,000, you might say, I'm not willing to take that additional risk to get that 100,000. Maybe I need to cut spending.
Right.
And if you're in the other scenario of, I don't need to take all that risk, but I also don't have to worry about it, let me just take 60 out and be conservative, you can look at it that way too.
Right. And I think the main message here is that it all comes down to your personal circumstances. A lot of people look at, how can I keep up with the market, or how can I make this much money in Bitcoin, or whatever, whatever the hot thing is these days. And all that's doing is creating just a comparison, which it's healthy to know the options out there.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is, what do you need for your plan to spend on what's important to you?
Yep.
So after the investment plan, our next favorite thing, taxes. So you need to have a tax plan. It would be great if that $150,000 was all after tax, and that's actually the goal. We want $150,000 after tax. So what does that mean if we're pulling it from a pre-tax account? So the three different buckets, if you will, is number one, let's say that traditional IRA I kind of just alluded to. Every dollar you take out of that is taxable. So if you need $50,000, you might have to take out $70,000 from that account just to get the $50,000. Depends on your tax rate. That's traditional IRAs. It's any pre-tax account, like a 401k that's traditional. It just matters if it's pre-tax or not. The next bucket is the Roth IRA. We champion this pretty good here, because if you've got $150,000 in a Roth IRA or $1 million in a Roth IRA, that is all of yours.
That's your money.
Whereas if you have $1 million in that traditional IRA, well, 20, 30 or more % of that is going to Uncle Sam. Yeah. So it's not all your money. So you have to think about, how am I putting money into these accounts, and also how am I taking money out of them? Because that Roth IRA, every single dollar you take out is completely tax-free, assuming you met all the requirements. You have to be 59 and a half. There's a few other things, but in general, it's tax-free. The last bucket is just a taxable account. So think about your bank accounts or just a brokerage account. If you earn interest on that or capital gains, you're going to owe tax on the year that happens. So you have to figure out, well, do I have a gain in that account? If I bought, let's say, 100 shares of Apple at $100,000, making numbers up because I don't know the price of Apple right now, and that 100,000 grew to 150,000, that $50,000 gain is what you're going to pay the tax on.
Yep.
So it's great that we have an investment plan, but you also have to know what's the after-tax income that you're going to get from all these accounts. And then the other part of this is the timing of things. We talked about Social Security. Well, that's taxable if you make above a certain amount. And that could actually vary year to year. So think about what the retirement transition really looks like. Someone retires, let's say, at 62. Well, they have 3 years before they get to Medicare age. Well, Medicare, the premiums, we're getting a little deep here, but the Medicare premiums can be impacted by your income from 2 years prior. So you have to be thinking about, well, am I pulling from that Roth? Am I pulling from traditional? Because it impacts not just the tax rate, but also other things like Medicare premiums. After you get on Medicare, you've been on there for a few years, then let's say you start Social Security at age 67 or age 70. That's where you have to be very conscious of how does it influence Social Security taxation. Because a lot of times what happens is it's a BOGO, a buy one, get one free, in exactly the wrong way. Yeah. So what I mean by that is you have $1 of income of Social Security that is not taxed, but when you add another $1 of income from, let's say, a traditional IRA distribution, you not only have to pay tax on that $1 IRA distribution, but it also causes your other Social Security income to be taxed. So it's a 2-for-1 special in the worst way. And then last but not least, the other thing that comes up is at age 73 or 75, depending on how old you are, people have to start taking required minimum distributions. So you have all these different stages of retirement that create different forms of income or different levels of income that have to be navigated to make sure you're saving as much in taxes as you can.
Yeah, and let's go back to something that you briefly mentioned that I think is good for a whole other tip is have a plan for health insurance.
Right.
While you're working, you typically will have employer-sponsored healthcare, and you don't have to worry about going to a private market or getting on Medicare. You work for an employer, you get your healthcare through them. Now, some organizations allow you to keep healthcare insurance into retirement. They have a retiree plan. The federal government has one. That's a different scenario. For a lot of people, when they retire, they lose out on medical benefits.
Right.
And if you're age 65, the easy answer is to get onto Medicare. And there are a couple different options. You can either do original Medicare or Medicare Advantage. There are differences to both, and I think that can be a whole other webinar.
And in fact, we do have a whole nother webinar, so feel free to go explore our YouTube page because it's all on there.
Yeah, but if you're doing original Medicare in 2025, that's going to cost you $185 a month. Right. And if we're looking about taxes and talking about IRMA surcharge, right, if you're single and you're over $106,000, you have a little bit of additional surcharge you have. If you're married, that number jumps up to $212. If you're over that, and then if there are various checkpoints throughout that you have to pay additional income tax for that Medicare surcharge. Right. And the hard, tricky part about this is, let's say you retire and you retire at age 63. Well, you now can't get Medicare until 65. What do? You have to come up with that healthcare plan of, maybe I go on the ACA exchange for those 2 years before I get onto Medicare. And we can get really complicated here and say, well, if you're getting on the ACA exchange, we can then use different various forms of income to sort of control that income and keep it low so that we can pick up those government subsidies for the ACA exchange.
Right, and just want to repeat what Alex said there. This is an incredible thing. This is why taxes get us so excited, because we've had clients who are worth $2-3 million who, because we're able to to manage their income on their tax return a certain way through those Roth distributions, through taxable brokerage accounts, get their income at that level, and have 90% of their health insurance paid for by the government.
While they're worth millions
while
of dollars.
they're worth, is that not a beautiful thing? You know, we, as Drew says, we don't try and understand why. We just memorize the law, and that's what we do. Is we try and benefit the client there. So, speaking of something like health insurance, something that's not that's even more unexciting, I'll say, is long-term care insurance. It's unexciting, but it is important. And a lot of people think that, well, maybe Medicare will cover a long-term care stay. And it does for a very, very short period of time. And there's other things that have to come into play for that to happen. But on the whole, it does not. And so we need to think, what do we need long-term care insurance? What do we need? But at this point, what I'm saying is we need a long-term care plan. Where do you want to live? I can think of probably my own parents, and I can think, my mom would say, sure, I'll live in a long-term care community, no problem. I love people. Let's talk to everybody. Mm-hmm. My dad, on the other hand, he likes his space. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to talk about it before, and doing it really at the beginning of retirement or even before that can make a lot of sense. And the questions, I went to a conference one time, and they spelled it out perfectly. There's 3 questions you ask yourself as you're having this conversation. You say, who's going to change my light bulb? Who's going to take me to get an ice cream cone? And who am I going to eat lunch with? If you think about those questions, who's going to change my light bulb? That is really asking the question, where am I going to live and how am I going to keep that house up? If I can't change my own light bulb in my own house, how can I live there unless I have someone else helping? And then who will take you to get your ice cream? That's all about transportation. If I can't drive anymore, how am I going to go get my ice cream? That's important stuff. Yeah. And then last but not least, who are you going to eat lunch with is so important because of that social connection. There's been plenty of studies that as you get older and you're in retirement, particularly if a spouse has passed away, there are a lot of times where you are alone, and that can affect your physical health. Mm-hmm. So finding ways to keep those social connections, again, regardless of if you're my mom or my dad in that situation, answering these questions is critical, and doing it far in advance to start thinking about it is really the way to go. And the last part about this is a bit of a meatier topic for us today, but it doesn't all have to be funded through long-term care insurance. That is absolutely something you should explore, and there's a lot of reasons that it can make sense, but it is one way to do it. The other ways you can think about it are going into a continuing care retirement community. We have plenty around us here in Baltimore, and you go into it paying a certain amount under what's called a Type A contract, and that monthly amount stays largely the same, even if you then need assisted living. You go in independent living, but if you need assisted living or skilled nursing, mm-hmm. that monthly amount stays mostly the same if you go under that Type A contract. A lot more detail we could go over there, but continuing care retirement communities are something to consider. And last but not least is if you want to self-fund. Insurance is not meant to, you don't pay insurance just for the sake of paying insurance. Mm-hmm. If someone's worth $5-10 million and you can afford a $200,000 annual expense, that might be fine.
Yeah. So I think a common theme that we've seen with all these tips is you have to have a plan. Right. And when you go into retirement, you also have to have a plan for your estate plan. And I think a common thing that we've seen is we meet with a client for the first time, we say, can we review your estate documents? And they go, oh yeah, we've had those prepared, let's take a look at them. And we look at them and they're 20 years old. And we say, are these still the same wishes and desires you had? And they go, well, no. And they want something different. And their financial situation has changed. Maybe their estate is a little bit more complicated. So there are things that need to be changed as you head into retirement with your estate plan. So review your will. Review if you have trust. Review those types of things to make sure that they are still not 20 years old and you don't need updating, as well as is everything in here still how we want it to have happen. You have to review powers of attorney. If you have an old power of attorney, it might not include some of the updated language. Does it have all of the same powers that you want? Do you have the right power of attorney in fact written down? Do you have the right alternates? These are all things that you have to consider. And same with the advance directive. Do you still have the people written in there that you still want making decisions? Are all of your decisions about how you want to have your healthcare decisions handled in the future, is that still all the same?
Right.
It's very important as you head into retirement to make sure these things are reviewed and updated if needed.
And that it normally comes to the forefront in retirement just because you're talking about all this other stuff. Just like you said, people will take their documents from normally when they had kids the first time, and they put it in a drawer, and sometimes they just lose it completely. But if not, it's just sitting in the drawer
And that's their estate
gathering
plan.
dust, and that's it. And so is estate planning 100% correlated with having a retirement income plan? No, but this is a really good opportunity to come up with how do we want this estate plan to operate? Because as I mentioned in the example of my grandfather, we don't know how long our retirement's going to be. And this plays a big role of that, what we call end of plan in our retirement planning software. And arguably, we talked at the beginning about how knowing your spending number is the most important. And I would correct myself and say that it is the most important thing from a financial standpoint. But the most important thing, I would say, actually has nothing to do with finances. It has everything to do with your purpose. What's retirement going to look like? If you've been working for 40 years and all of a sudden that's gone, you've lost a structure, you've lost sometimes connections with your coworkers. What are you going to do? And everybody says travel and golf and all these fun things, and that's nice for the first 2 years maybe, but after that, you got 20 some years potentially left. So finding what's your purpose, and then a lot of times the other thing that constrains people is not their wealth, it is their health. If you stop stimulating your brain from work or something, or you're not moving around quite as much, that health is really important thing. One of our more recent clients said something that I thought was great. He said his health is his job, and him and his wife focus on that a lot because that really can change your retirement significantly. And then last but not least, if you are married, having that conversation with your spouse of what does retirement look like for both of us, because when you go to work every day and you're only seeing each other for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, that's a lot different than spending every minute of every day together. So talking through that and understanding how does it look, that's another thing that's pretty important.
So as we wrap up, those are the top 10 things we think you should be thinking about when you are thinking about retirement in 2025. And I think an important thing to note is these are all things to think about. Develop a plan. Think about this. Think about that. And if you're saying, yeah, I think I need some help developing this plan. I've thought about it, but there are some intricacies that I really need help with. And if you're a current client, please reach out to your primary advisor and express these concerns that you have. And if you know anyone that you think would benefit from this webinar or talking with us, please send this video to them. We'd be happy to talk with them. We're going to throw up a link here on the screen that you can schedule an intro directly from our website.
This is a new thing for me with YouTube and all. So is this where we say like, oh, subscribe here, do this here?
Yeah, we'll hit the bell icon here and do that here.
Yeah, you guys will figure it out. You guys will figure it out.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.